So I'm over the moon to hand over to Professor Dave Goulson from the University of Sussex, who's going to give us an introduction to the Buzz Club, the event, and what we can look forward to hearing more about. So over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Kieran. Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So falls to me to introduce the Buzz Club and explain what it is, what it's trying to do, how it came about, and talk about the underlying issues that we created it to try to address. No, I can't change slides. What's going on? Bear with me a second. There we go. So the Buzz Club began, I think, about 8 years ago. I can't remember a precise date. It was created by a group of us at the University of Sussex who had a shared fascination with the insect world. We're all kind of, we all love insects, I think it's fair to say, for whatever strange reason. And we're all, I think, these days aware that insects are in decline, they're in trouble, largely due to a whole bunch of man-made factors, which is a deep concern, and I'll explain why for anyone who doesn't know in a few minutes. But also, it springs, the Buzz Club was created because I think it's pretty clear that gardens and urban areas can play an important role in insect conservation and in biodiversity conservation more generally. But there's an awful lot of advice out there about what works best, about what people should do in their gardens. Things like, you know, everyone should have a bug hotel of some sort, or lots of different bug hotels. Or you shouldn't use pesticides, or you shouldn't mow in May. No mow May, great idea. I'm not criticizing it, but if everyone mows on the 1st of June, is that really the best outcome? Probably not. So although there are things we know, and I'll mention some of them, there is evidence to support some things we might do in gardens. There are lots of gaps in our knowledge. And so the Buzz Club was created to try and fill some of those gaps, to do experiments, to provide scientific evidence as to how best to encourage wildlife in gardens with a particular focus on insect life. But then the next kind of question is, why citizen science? I guess partly it was because it's hard to get very big grants to study this kind of thing. It would be very difficult to get a multi-million-pound research grant to study garden wildlife. It's not considered a sort of sexy enough subject, unfortunately. So it's quite difficult to do big-scale experiments without funding unless you harness the power of citizen scientists. You persuade ordinary people to collect data for you. And so that's what the approach we've taken, and it has lots of advantages and some disadvantages, and Beth Nichols will be talking about this a bit more later. But broadly, the citizen science approach enables us to do much bigger experiments than we could possibly do ourselves, just simply because of the manpower. We can simultaneously collect data from hundreds or even thousands of different gardens all over the country, or potentially even internationally, which is great. And it also provides us with access to those gardens, or private gardens, that we couldn't otherwise get into. And perhaps the biggest benefit of all of citizen science is it provides the opportunity for ordinary folk to engage with science, to learn a bit more about how science works, and to find out more about the insects that live, the wildlife that lives in their own little patch. There are downsides too, and difficulties with citizen science, but I'll leave that for the later speakers to talk about. Anyway, let me just rewind a bit and sort of explain the background to why it's important, why we should be worried about insects, and why the Buzz Club was created. Do forgive me if you've heard some of this before, but I think it's important and bears repetition. So insects, I think, are amazing creatures, incredibly diverse. They've been around for about 480 million years, which is a really long time, much longer than dinosaurs. And they make up the bulk of life on Earth. About 70% of all known species are different types of insect. We've named about 1.1 million different types of insect. And amazingly, it's estimated there could be another 5 million or perhaps even 10 million that we haven't yet discovered. How cool is that? And of course, insects are important. As I say, forgive me if you know all this and don't need convincing. I won't spend long on it. Insects are important as food for the majority of vertebrates, birds, bats, lots of freshwater fish, amphibians, reptiles, and so on. All depend on insects for food. So if insects were to disappear, then that would be bad news for all wildlife. Of course, insects aren't just important as food. They perform a whole bunch of vital ecological roles as recyclers, as pest controllers, helping to keep the soil healthy, distribute seeds. They're really important in nutrient cycles, breaking down cow dung and dead bodies and tree trunks and leaves and so on and so on. And of course, the best recognized thing that insects do for us, the one that gets the most attention, is they are pollinators. They are the main pollinators of a very large number of plant species. 87% of all plant species in the world, I think is the figure, require pollination by some kind of animal. And in the tropics, it might be a hummingbird or a bat or whatever. But in Europe, it's all done by insects of one type or another. There are lots of different insects, not just bees. It's important to recognize. But between them, they make sure that flowers set seed and that our crops produce a good harvest. And I'm sure you know these figures, but about 3/4 of the crop varieties we grow in the world wouldn't give a full harvest if it weren't for insect pollinators. It includes the large majority of fruits, many vegetables, and even things like coffee and chocolate are insect pollinated. So our supermarkets wouldn't look so great, and we couldn't feed everybody, at least not a healthy diet, without insects. So insects are really important economically and ecologically. And I've trotted out the economic arguments for insect conservation many times. But it always leaves me feeling slightly sad. It seems a bit of a shallow approach to conserving insects to say, well, we need insects because otherwise we'd be in trouble. Does it all have to be about ourselves? I don't know. That's not why I care about insects. I care about insects because I think they're cool and fascinating. And I would argue that they have a right to exist, whether they do something useful or not. And this might seem a bit tangential, but bear with me. Just to give you an example, this is the St. Helena giant earwig. It's an example of an insect that probably wasn't particularly useful from a human perspective. It was the world's biggest earwig, a big whopper of a thing, about 7 centimeters long, lived on the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, but hasn't been seen since the 1960s, pretty certainly extinct. And it lived in seabird colonies. Its disappearance doesn't seem to have had any kind of ecological ramifications. There's nothing not being done that needed to be done, as it were. But isn't it sad that this creature is gone, that none of us will, well, we were probably never going to see it, even if it hadn't gone extinct. But the world is a poorer place for not having a giant earwig, I would argue, regardless of whether it was useful to mankind or not. And I think we should just be recognize that all life on our planet has the right to exist. Anyway, I'm going off on one. I'll rein myself in and turn to more serious stuff. So insects are important one way or another and deserve looking after. And of course, you've all heard insects are in decline. The data are very gappy, with lots of knowledge gaps as to exactly how much they're in decline and so on. But some of the statistics are really terrifying. I'm just going to show you a couple. Firstly, these are data from Germany, a quite famous study published in 2017, based on malaise traps, that funny tent-like thing. and they capture flying insects, and these malaria traps were put on nature reserves all across Germany from 1989 onwards. And the average biomass of insects caught per day fell by 76% in 26 years. So seemingly 3/4 of the German insects vanished in half my lifetime, which is pretty less than half my lifetime, pretty terrifying. And we have data from elsewhere. Let me just show you an example close to my own heart. This is the shrill carder. I'm a bumblebee specialist. The shrill carder bumblebee was a relatively common bumblebee. It turned up in gardens regularly in the first half of the 20th century, at least in the southern half of the UK. But as time has gone on, it's disappeared. I first saw one in the year 2000 when it was down to about 6 populations. The ones I saw were on Salisbury Plain, but that population's gone extinct since 2000. And a couple of years ago, the one on the Somerset level seems to have gone extinct. So this bee's disappearing before our eyes and could go extinct within a small number of years on current trajectory. So this is not a historical thing. This is a thing that's still happening. Sadly, the only aspect of this that most people have noticed is this one. But I'm sure you all can see where this is going. The infamous bug splat phenomenon that if you're old enough, and I'm old enough, you can remember a time when, if you went for a long drive in the summer, your windscreen became opaque and you literally had to stop to scrub it. And that just doesn't happen anymore. The insects just aren't there. As this cartoonist has illustrated here, the cartoonist goes on to extrapolate to the future, and it's obviously suggesting that the lack of insects could be bad news for us too. This isn't just sort of just a cartoon. Actually, the Bug Life and Kent Wildlife Trust did a national bug splat study, which was published last year. They found that there was a 78% decline in bug splats in the last 20 years. So actually rather similar to the German study, even slightly greater decline in the UK. Pretty terrifying stuff, really. Okay, so what can we do about it? Well, most of us have a garden, or many people have a garden, or if not, an access to a window box or a roof terrace or some kind of outdoor space. If we do, then we can all get involved in doing something, however small, to help nature, to help our declining insects. This is actually something that I get really excited about, because I think it's great that it's something that people can actually directly get their hands dirty, get involved in doing, and see the rewards. It really does work. And if we can persuade enough people to make their gardens wildlife friendly, then that would really help. You know, there's something like 22 million private gardens just in the UK, and they cover in the region of 400,000 hectares of land, which is a bigger area than all of our national nature reserves. And so I have this sort of crazy dream where all of Britain's gardens are insect friendly, wildlife friendly. Wouldn't that be great? And if we could get councils on board as well, so the parks were wildlife friendly and the road verges and the roundabouts and so on, then we'd really start to be making some headway, I think. And anyway, sorry for plugging my own books, but I've written some books about this stuff, should you want more. Anyway, so gardens, as we'll see, definitely have the potential to be good for wildlife. But many aren't, and it does seem to me that there's a bit of a dichotomy, that there's a sort of, while there's definitely a popular movement towards wildlife gardening and garden rewilding and so on, call it what you like, there's also people going in the opposite direction pretty fast. There's been a huge growth in sales of plastic grass, God help us. I'm not going to launch into a rant about plastic grass. You'll just have to... I'm sure you agree. I hope you agree. You can even get, look, that's a plastic hedge next to a plastic lawn. How soulless and sad is that? Anyway, I'm guessing people here don't do that, but many of us do go to garden centres. Garden centres do a huge industry these days, and we're probably, if we do go to garden centres, guilty of quite a few sort of environmental harms that we may not really think about. You know, we'll fill a trolley with annual bedding plants in disposable plastic pots, probably grown in a peat-based compost, probably treated with lots of pesticides. And many people will also buy some herbicide, maybe some bug spray, maybe a sack of fertilizer, maybe a sack of peat-based compost. The whole industry is fraught with environmental harms, it seems to me. But on the other hand, we do know that gardens can be hugely beneficial to wildlife. And there's this lovely example of Jenny Owen, who was a lady who lived in Leicester, who spent 30 odd years cataloguing the wildlife of her garden. And it wasn't a very big garden, only about 1/8 of an acre. But her species list, after 35 years of counting, was 2,673 different species in her little urban garden, which I think is pretty amazing. And nearly 2,000 of those were different types of insect. So we certainly can have lots of insects in our gardens, huge numbers. And we do know, so there are various bits of evidence showing, for example, that bumblebees nests on average grow better, they grow faster in gardens or in suburban areas than they do in farmland. So suburban areas can be a refuge for wildlife that struggles to survive in modern intensive farmland. This chart just shows you the weights of bumblebee nests over time in farmland with and without flower strips, which doesn't seem to make much difference. But by far the winner here were the garden nests, the line at the top, which grew much faster. Simply, I think, because there's a lot more flowers in most urban areas than there are in most agricultural areas. We also know, based on a couple of pretty solid studies, that some done by the RHS, I should say, and this one at the bottom here is one I was involved in, but all the work was done by Rosie Rowlings of Rosie Bee Nursery. That native plants, if we grow them in our garden, provide on average more benefits than non-natives, both because they tend on average to be more attractive to pollinators, and here's some examples of some of the best pollinator-friendly plants that are native wildflowers that you can grow in your garden. I have them all in my garden here. But also native plants provide more opportunities for herbivorous insects, and that's probably the biggest benefit from growing natives. Non-native plants, so you imagine some of the real exotics, like if you plant a eucalyptus tree in your garden, none of our native insects are able to eat the leaves or any other part of the plant. So unless you have a pet koala, it's basically useless for wildlife. Whereas if you plant a native tree, you can have hundreds of insects nibbling away on the leaves and burrowing into the bark and twigs and acorns or whatever. So this is just an example. Orange-tipped butterflies are on the wing at the moment, gorgeous creatures. But they'll only lay their eggs on a couple of wildflower species in the cabbage family, lady's smock there being one of them. So unless you grow those native wildflowers, you won't have breeding orange tips in your garden. Which kind of brings me briefly to the subject of weeds. We have good evidence from research done by other scientists at Sussex, not those involved in the Buzz Club, that weeds such as dandelions and ragwort and thistles are amongst the most rewarding plants for pollinators. They have the bigger, longest lists of different species of insects and more records of insects visiting them than almost all non-weed plants. So we should try to be more tolerant of plants that have been, I think, somewhat unfairly labeled as kind of undesirables in a garden setting. Okay, I need to wrap up in a second. So just one other topic that's of personal interest to me, relevant to weeds, of course, is the fact that we we often see this kind of thing in our cities, which seems to me highly unnecessary. The use of herbicides to kill weeds in urban areas. I could talk about this at length. I think it's a pretty crazy idea to be using these toxins in our streets. They're harmful to insects, and they're probably harmful to people and pets and so on. But nonetheless, this is rather sadly, actually, topically in Brighton Council banned the use of herbicide in the streets and parks 3 or 4 years ago, but has just reversed that decision, which seems to me to be a step in the wrong direction, especially since we just recently published a paper, and this is a citizen science study from Sussex, based on the BTO's garden birdwatch data, where we found that there are fewer species of butterflies in gardens that use pesticides. So there is seemingly a direct impact of pesticide use based on decent scientific evidence. There's a whole string of projects. We're up to, this isn't an exclusive list by any means, but I think we've got about 10 or so projects on the go at the moment. Quite variable. Many of them focused on kind of the sort of bug hotel kind of projects. And I think perhaps in the future we need more flower projects personally. But anyway, I won't talk you through these one by one here. I'll skip on to the next slide where I have a few images. So already running, but still open for people to join should they be interested. Our biggest project so far is the appropriately named Big Bee Hotel experiment. As one of the earlier speakers mentioned, it seems to be vital to add the word big to your project if you want to get lots of people to take part. But I think it is quite a big project because we've got 400-ish plus, I think now, hotels all around the UK that we've have been registered in our database. So this is basically focused on finding out which types of bee hotel work best and where to put them, how high off the ground, should it be south, north facing, and so on. There are loads and loads of designs of bee hotel out there aimed to provide nest sites for solitary bees. We know some of them are better than others, but we don't have good data. We don't have evidence as to which ones are best. What are the right size holes? What are the right locations? What are the best designs, and so on. So anyone who has a bee hotel, be it bought or homemade, can register their hotel, and all we need they need to do is send us a picture once a month of the front of their hotel, and we can see how many holes are occupied, like that picture dead center where all the holes are occupied. That's from my garden a couple of years ago. Anyway, related to that, we've got the Airbnb project. Most of our amusing names came from Linda at some point, which is specifically investigating the optimum hole size for bee hotels by getting people to create hotels with holes ranging from 6 to 10 mil and then record occupancy. But then we have sites, it's not all about bee hotels. We get a bit carried away with bee hotels, but as you've heard, we have the Hoverfly Lagoon project, which has got a new iteration for this year, and it's time to start very soon. Brilliant fun if you've got kids, like to see some rat-tailed maggots in the garden. Sorry, long-tailed larvae, Ali likes to call them. The Bees and Heat Waves project you've heard about. Please do sign up if you'd like to help us find out more about the impacts of heat waves on bee foraging and which plants are best to grow to mitigate the impacts of heat waves, which undoubtedly we'll have more of in the future. One project that hasn't been mentioned yet is the earwig hotel project. Earwigs are not everyone's cup of tea, but they're actually really important pest controllers. Their favorite food are aphids in fruit trees. They're really good at scurrying around eating the aphids and other small pest insects. But they often lack places to shelter in gardens. Earwigs are nocturnal and they need somewhere to hide up during the day. So we're testing out various designs of earwig hotel. This is a rather ugly one based on a plastic pot, but Linda's latest design involves rather attractive teacups, but I'll leave you to check out the website to find out more. We have other projects like the garden shop calculator that will help you work out how much money you've saved by growing fruit and veg in your garden, should you be interested to know. That was something Beth helped develop with Linda, and was used in her Team Pollinate project. And so on and so on. I forget all the others. Do check out the website. We're also very much open to suggestions from our members and sponsors as to what projects people would like to be part of, what questions they think are important, what they would like to know about what really works in their garden for encouraging insects and other wildlife. So, for example, I think we need some kind of mowing project, but I'd be interested to hear our members' thoughts on that. But the whole kind of no mow May has caught the public's imagination, has been the subject of Plant Life's campaign. But is that the right thing, just not mowing in May? Should it be no May June, or should it be no mow all summer, or whatever? It'd be quite fun to do a manipulative experiment where we ask people to try out different mowing regimes and see what works best. But we're all very much open to other ideas that you might have. Please tell us. It's one of the beauties of the Buzz Club. It's small and it's nimble, and we're very flexible. And if there are things that people want to do, then we're more than happy to try to devise a suitable project. So how do you get involved? If you want to get involved with the Buzz Club, it's very easy. Go to the website, which has tons of information about the projects and publications that we've generated in the past, and a whole bunch of other resources, including stuff for kids. Lots of different ways to contact us. Most importantly, do consider becoming a member, which is free and gets you regular emails, and you can take part in any of our projects. But please consider, and I'm sorry to do this right at the end of the day, but do consider sponsoring the Buzz Club, because we do need money. As sponsorship starts at £2 a month, as well as the usual benefits of being a member, you get a few extra perks, including a goodie pack and an invitation to Q&A with our staff and so on. But most importantly, you get the warm, fuzzy glow from supporting us. The Buzz Club works on a tiny budget. It's mostly done by volunteers. Most of the speakers today aren't paid, including me. We don't get a penny for work with the Buzz Club. The Buzz Club just has, in fact, 2 part-time members of staff. Linda, you've heard from, and Izzy, who's been busy behind the scenes. They don't get paid very much, but nonetheless, sorry, I'm rambling slightly here, but the Buzz Club is only really functions because we had a nice donation from a very kind lady a couple of years ago. But we're slowly spending that money, and the Buzz Club will go bust unless we can increase our numbers of sponsors. So do consider sponsoring us if you think Buzz Club is doing something useful. Ideally, go a bit above the £2 a month, £5 a month, £10 a month, and that would really help. As I say, you get the warm, fuzzy glow of knowing that you're helping us to help bees and other garden insects, and you're also helping an Izzy and a Linda as well, which is also important.